People now have FSR4 running on RDNA2 GPUs, even on Windows. Previously, this was possible on Linux, and also we even have it up and running on Steam Deck now. This is a video from Deck Wizard using the same files that were used in the Windows version, but this is pretty interesting for an image quality analysis. Like, this is the older version of DLSS. You can see how shimmery and aliased it gets in the distance, how flickery, and able to switch over to FSR4 and then apply those settings, and a lot of those artifacts and shimmering is taken care of. However, is now at 35 frames per second as opposed to like 45 frames per second, so FSR4 is not running efficiently on these technically unsupported GPUs. Again, the person who was running it on RDNA3 GPU on Reddit has posted some performance figures as well. Again, this is running on Windows, saying that using FSR 3.1.5, getting about 84 frames per second at 1440p with everything maxed out and some ray tracing. They didn't say exactly which ray tracing, but mentioning that they get all this shimmering on grass and such as you're used to with FSR 3, but switching over to FSR 4 was able to get 79 frames per second at 1440p, everything at maxed out and ray tracing, but saying there's a 6 to 7 FPS loss compared to 3.1.5. Now, I don't like using frames per second as a metric here. You should more think of it as a percentage. So we're going from 84 FPS to 79 FPS, and 79 out of 84 is 94%. So it's reaching 94% of the performance as you were getting with FSR 3.1.5. So not a huge performance lost on the 7900 XTX, although in the Steam Deck case that we saw here, it was a much more significant loss. And again, the Steam Deck GPU is much older. It's RDNA2 architecture based, I believe, rather than RDNA3, and is just much less powerful overall. So I think that would explain those differences. Now, I haven't had a chance to explore this myself. I've been pretty busy with Borderlands stuff, and oh yes, we're going to talk about some more Randy Pitchford tweets today, but I wanted to start with something not Borderlands related since I've done so many Borderlands videos in a row. Anyway, how are people getting this FSR4 working on Windows and Steam Deck and all of that on unsupported hardware? It all comes to this post here, saying FSR SDK leak contained FSR4 files that work on practically any modern GPU, including RDNA3. Now, the idea here is that, as I reported a while ago, AMD had posted their Fidelity FS SDK 2.0 on GitHub. However, their initial post accidentally contained some FSR4 related files that they didn't intend to post there. However, they did post it there. It was up there for a couple of days to my knowledge, and that is technically under like an MIT open source license. So those files are out there on the internet now. Now, this Reddit user has compiled them, and they are able to get them up and running. Now, what's unique about these FSR4 files is that these are designed to run on int8 instructions rather than FP8. FP8 support is only on RDNA4 if we're talking AMD GPUs, whereas int8 instructions can run on older hardware. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean, though, that this version of FSR4 is the same as the FSR4 that's FP8 that we are actually getting officially supported in RDNA4 GPUs, so that's important to notice. But as we saw in the Steam Deck footage, the image quality is certainly better than FSR3. So I think at this point, it's still up in the air on exactly how this compares to the official version of FSR4 that we got released. But it's interesting, at least, to show that in theory, some kind of AI version of FSR that is better looking, although less performant than FSR3, should be able to run, and currently is running through mods, on older hardware. So that probably lends some hope to maybe getting more official support from AMD, and that this was just work in progress files that are maybe going to see the light of day in some kind of official implementation in the future. Now, I've seen some people misreporting on this, saying that this only works on RDNA3 but not RDNA2 because it requires WMMA instructions. But this version does not appear to be compiled for WMMA. According to the poster here, and I think that's why it is running on RDNA2. But that could potentially mean that you could have a version that is designed for WMMA support that would actually run faster on RDNA3 than maybe this version does, or maybe run at the same speed with better image quality, etc. So anyway, this is really interesting. I'll link all my sources in the video description. Like I said, I have not had a chance to play around with actually testing this for myself, but there is a lot of people reporting on it working. And again, we do have the Deck Wizard video here, and he does explain, he is sourcing those same files that we just talked about here, how to install it on Steam Deck, etc., and is showing those image quality benefits. So I thought this was ready for reporting in a news video because this does seem to be legit despite me not having completely tested it out for myself. Now, on the lines of maybe getting an AMD official implementation of this, I found this and found it interesting in light of what we're seeing here. So I saw this article at WCCF Tech, again, all my sources will be in the video description, saying AMD's FSR Redstone reportedly won't be Radeon only. Neural rendering core to work on Nvidia's GeForce and Intel Arc GPUs too, but when you read into this, it seems like really just any GPU with modern shader instructions. And remember that FSR Redstone isn't just stuff that hasn't been released yet. The FSR4 upscaling is listed as part of FSR Redstone. So this could potentially be read as saying that the upscaling component should eventually be supported on other GPUs, not be an AMD exclusive, and could run potentially on older AMD hardware. Here's the direct quote from AMD's Senior Director of Software Development, Chris Hall. He says, FSR Redstone was developed using AMD ML2 code, machine learning to code, a research project from ROCm. The core part of the neural rendering technology is converted into optimized compute shader code by utilizing ML to code. This means that FSR Redstone's neural rendering core can also run on GPUs made by other companies. At AMD, we use HIP in the development process. By the way, I'm not good with all these acronyms and whatnot, like machine learning coding, not my specialty. So I'm just reading this, pronouncing things how I think they're pronounced, etc. Some of you in the audience may be more knowledgeable about all of the details here than me, but I'm just reporting the quote and I'll give my thoughts on it. So at AMD, we use HIP in the development process for many innovative new AI-related technologies. ML to code aims to integrate with the most commonly used graphics rendering pipelines, such as Vulkan's shader language, GLSL, and DirectX's HLSL. It's highly likely that the AI cores of the various AI-related functions used in FSR Redstone are developed using HIP code. This is because HIP code can output code optimized for each generation of Radeon GPU. I think that's relevant right there. And thanks to this architecture, it can also run on GPUs other than AMD. Regardless of whether this makes sense, if HIP code is converted to CUDA and built with an NVIDIA compiler, it will likely run on an NVIDIA GPU. In other words, one way of reading this, again though, this is beyond my area of expertise, is that FSR Redstone should run on GPUs with modern shader languages, could be optimized for each generation of Radeon GPU, could potentially be up and running on older generations of AMD GPUs. So that certainly seems interesting. And again, maybe that means that when we get the full FSR Redstone launch, we would also be getting it up and running on less exclusive hardware. Now, whether it runs as quickly or as good or anything, I mean, all that's still up in the air. But now let's read some Randy Pitchford tweets. How's that for a segue? All right. You can do whatever you want. The game is the game. Please get a refund from Steam if you aren't happy with it. So, Borderlands 4 CEO basically saying, refund the game if you're not happy with the performance or the game for whatever reason. So take them up on that, guys, if you need to. I want to be clear, though, like, I'm not saying that this game isn't good. It's just I'm so frustrated that he just keeps denying that there's any optimization issues. You made an analogy to vehicle. I would not put a Ferrari engine in a monster truck and expect it to drive like a Ferrari. If you tell me about your specification, I can help you optimize your performance. I'm sorry you don't like being told to use DLSS, but that is the way. So again, just rolling back on, the game performs fine, just kick on lots of DLSS. That's it. That's what you need to do. Accept it. The game is totally optimized for DLSS. If you're not happy using the tools available to you to improve frame rate and you're not happy with the frame rate you have, you should play a different game. The game is awesome and is designed to be just fine of an experience at 30 FPS. So again, also saying that like, it's fine, just play at 30 FPS, guys. And 60 FPS is great. Now, I know a lot of PC users, first-person shooter style games, we want to be around like 90 FPS plus. I understand not all hardware is going to be there. You shouldn't necessarily expect it to on all hardware. More on that in a minute, though. But I think for most PC users using a mouse, aiming at 30 frames per second in a first-person shooter is not a just fine experience. But anyway, we also have provided a lot of options for you to make different trade-offs between frame rate, resolution, and graphics features than we would make, and we encourage you to use those tools to optimize to your taste. Would you like helping tuning your experience better to your liking? Anyway, I really think that he needs to just get off of Twitter because it's just too easy to make fun of these tweets, and I just have to I have to say a little bit more about Borderlands 4 optimization. So I made a video recently looking at performance in Borderlands 4, responding to the claim that it's optimized, just use DLSS, and I tested it out on an RTX 4060 at a variety of graphics settings. Anyway, I would like, in that video I compared it to Cyberpunk, but some people pointed out, how about compare it to previous Borderlands games? But I'm going to compare it in an interesting way. I actually went back and I remembered, you know what? I benchmarked Tiny Tina's Wonderlands when it launched about 3 years ago on a variety of hardware. And at the time, the RTX 3060 was basically, in terms of how old it was, basically the equivalent to an RTX 4060 now, if that makes sense. At this time, the RTX 3060 had been out for just a little over 2 years. And, you know, that was kind of the mainstream GPU most people would have bought recently if they'd bought a PC recently, that kind of situation, right? And whereas like today, that's kind of your situation on an RTX 4060. So here's Borderlands 4, and trying to run it at max settings on an RTX 4060, I was in the 20 FPS range. So if we go back to like Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, on an RTX 3060, which at the time of release, to be clear, Tiny Tina's Wonderlands launched on March 25th of 2022, and the RTX 3060 launched on February 25th of 2021. So actually, I think this holds up, right? So you're kind of on your current generation 60 class card competitor. Hopefully it makes sense what I'm trying to say here, right? So when I tested out 1080p maximum settings on an RTX 3060 in the previous Borderlands game, right? That's the connection I'm trying to make here. So the current 60 class card in the Borderlands release of the time, I was getting well over 60 frames per second at native 1080p maximum graphics settings. And like, there's still a lot of foliage, there's still a lot of draw distance, it still has your cel-shaded art style. I do think the newer game looks better, but I mean, there is a good amount of foliage going on, right? Like, the same basic art style's there. You switch to the new one, and again, really it's the lumen lighting system does look nicer, but it's also incredibly heavy. And I think they're also running nanite, and why, with this much detail showing, in other words, like lack of actual geometric detail showing, why do you need nanite? That just doesn't seem like an optimal choice if we want to talk about optimization. And here we have the current, 60 class GPU that most people would have bought. I know the 5060 just now launched and is a little more powerful, but the 4060 here at 22 FPS at max settings. Now, max settings is obviously not the only thing that you should test. And I tested out other settings here as well. Let's see, I think that was using upscaling and such. So here I went straight down to low settings. So if we want to test out, I restarted the game, tested out on low settings. At low settings, you lose a lot of that foliage that you had here, right? The lighting's still there, not quite as good. And here we're still under 60 frames per second. And again, this is at native 1080p resolution on your kind of current 60 class card. If we go back to Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, on the RTX 3060, the current 60 class GPU at that time, it was running faster than that at 1080p maximum settings. And notice that you still got some, grass into the draw distance grass, etc. Going out there. So in other words, max settings then don't look as good as max settings now. But I would say that the performance here on a weaker GPU, right, is better than what we're seeing here on what's now a newer, more powerful GPU. And like, you have to strip things back so far and you're still under 60 FPS. So this is why people are upset, Randy. In previous Borderlands games and in many new games in general, if you're on a recent 60 class GPU at 1080p, you could expect that at least when you turn down settings, you could run the game at native 1080p resolution and get reasonable performance. I'm under 60 FPS here at the lowest graphic settings available in the game, and at max settings, I'm at 22 frames per second. And in your previous Borderlands game, the 60 class GPU of the day could run well over 60 frames per second at max settings 1080p native resolution. And if you go all the way down to the lowest settings in the game, which don't look good, to be clear, performance could be nearly 200 frames per second. Okay? Yeah, that strips a lot of the graphics away, but that was the case. So you could get nearly 200 frames per second in on the current 60 class GPU of the time at the low settings, and at max settings you were over 60 FPS. Now you launch Borderlands 4, and on a current 60 class GPU, the low settings 1080p can't even get you 60 frames per second, and the maximum settings are at like 20. So, Randy, that's the problem, okay? That's the problem. And yes, you can just crank DLSS enough to get a playable experience at reduced settings, but you didn't used to have to do that. That's why people are mad. Anyway, let's talk about something besides Borderlands again for a second. So, no, the Nvidia RTX 50 Founders Edition GPUs have not been discontinued or end-of-lifed. All FE cards are in production. This is a WCCF Tech article that's following up on a story that I don't think I had reported on, but it was being reported that people noticed that certain Founders Edition cards in certain regions were no longer listed on NVIDIA's website, where you can link to purchase their Founders Edition GPUs. So it looks like WCCF Tech got clarification from NVIDIA specifically saying RTX 50 series Founders Editions continue to be in production. They are limited edition products, so from time to time go out of stock on our website and return when back in stock. So they are claiming that they have not exited production. They will go back in stock and will be available on those websites again. Now let's switch gears to an Xbox app update on PC. So this has been, available to like insiders for a little while now, but this is now the official launch on September 15th, where you can now get a combined gaming library on the Xbox for PC app. So you can launch your Steam games and your Xbox games and your Epic Store games all from the same launcher, which could be a convenient option. So the summary here is Xbox is bringing your gaming library, select third-party apps, and PC storefronts together in one convenient place. Everyone now has access to the new aggregated gaming library, and coming soon, everyone will be able to access their cloud-playable titles and play history across all devices. This is certainly interesting, and I think is a good move forward for Windows trying to make their own gaming experience in their own storefront, optimal. And I think not making it exclusive and opening it up to Steam, because obviously most people will have a big Steam library at this point, all of that, I think is the right way to go. And I think the obvious reason for this that kind of kickstarted all of it is that they're moving with their Xbox Ally coming out soon for their handheld. So that's certainly interesting. Now, moving into some CPU news, we have AMD formally introducing the Ryzen 7 9700F and Ryzen 5 9500F, F meaning no integrated graphics available. And so the information here is it's basically just like they've been listed, they're here. Okay. Now, the actual pricing and expected availability is still kind of unknown. And whether they'll be fully global available, like the 9500F is listed with global availability, while the 9700F shows NA. So again, we'll have to see where these are actually available and what their pricing is. Videocards.com helpfully has the specs up here for us. So the 9700F is still listing a max clock speed of 5.5 gigahertz like the 9700X. And 40 megabytes of cache, 65 watt TDP. So really, it just seems to be missing the integrated graphics. Other than that, you would probably expect similar performance. So if the price is good and you already got a discrete GPU, seems pretty interesting. The 9500F, though, does seem to be getting a minor clock speed drop from 5.2 gigahertz on the 9600 to 5 gigahertz on the 9500F. Same cache though, so probably not a major performance difference. So mostly just the whether or not you have the iGPU. Now, interestingly, we are also seeing that there will be a Ryzen 5 5600F. It is officially listed. And yes, that's another 5000 series AM4 CPU. So AMD just keeps going, I think 9 years now, still getting new launches for that platform. That's insane. Anyway, so yeah, going into the ninth year, videocards.com helpfully has this one at so it's 3 gigahertz, 4 gigahertz, I think max here, whereas like the 5600 was 3.5, 4.4. So it's certainly a clock speed drop from the 5600, which is already a little slower than the 5600X, although only slightly. But yeah, so another step down, but interesting that still getting CPUs there. Now, what about the new handhelds coming out? Well, we did see a price listed at $1,220 in China, with Bazite OS confirmed for the GPD Win 5. This is the Strix Halo based, so that's the 40 compute unit, insanely huge processor, which I did, by the way, just test a mini PC with that processor in Borderlands 4. So if you missed that video, because I was posting like 2 Borderlands videos a day there for several days in a row, I did test out that. So it's not a GPD Win 5, but it is a mini PC running the same hardware in Borderlands 4. And honestly, it performed pretty well for integrated graphics, way above what you would normally expect from integrated graphics. So I'm interested in this. Again, the interesting thing about the GPD Win 5, besides the huge GPU, is the fact that because that'll draw a lot of more power than you would normally see in a handheld, it has this like this battery pack that can either be clipped on, or you could like put in a backpack or a pocket or something to make the device in your hand a little bit lighter. Kind of interesting. Now, in other interesting GPU setups, I saw this posted. So there's a new eGPU dock. How would you pronounce this? Austar? I don't know. Anyway, but you essentially can clip a mini PC onto the eGPU dock, so basically making the bulk of the whole thing just be the GPU itself. Now, the problem though with this dock and stand is it doesn't have a power supply built in, so you would need to bring your own power supply, seeming to be the downside, but kind of interesting. Also, AMD is discussing ROCm 7.0 being announced here. Now, again, this side of productivity ROCm stuff, a little over my outside of my area of expertise. So I will just mention this is a thing, and this source will be linked in the video description if you would like to pursue that further. And also interesting to me, but again, not something I'm an expert on, is video codecs. So we've got AV1 encoding on the last generation or two of GPUs, and that greatly increased the kind of image quality we can get at the same bit rate. But AO Media is confirming that AV2 codec specs will be released by the end of this year. Of course, once the specs are released, it'll still take time for adoption. The quote here saying AV2, a generation leap in open video coding, and the answer to the world's growing streaming demands, delivers significantly better compression performance than AV1. AV2 provides enhanced support for AR and VR applications, split screen delivery of multiple programs, improved handling of screen content, and an ability to operate over a wider visual quality range. AV2 marks a milestone on the path to an open, innovative future of media experiences. Anyway, so we'll have to see when this actually makes its way to products and use cases and software, etc. But that's at least kind of on the horizon now, so thought I would report on that. And then the last thing I'll mention is if you're following Bloodlines 2 at all, there was a massive amount of pushback that 2 of the playable clans would be limited to DLC, but that apparently got enough pushback that it is being walked back. And it will now, in the store, the game will actually include all of the playable clans at launch, but there will still be some story DLCs launching in 2026. Anyway, that's all the news that I have for you guys today. Hopefully you found it useful and or interesting, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.